Let's talk a little bit about freedom. Freedom is this thing that we're, uh, I guess, trying to gain in life, right? Liberation, freedom. I want to feel free. And I think something that's been a long kind of thought of mine, critique, you might say, of Western, quote unquote, or you might even say, quote unquote, white culture, as there's this conflation of freedom, or the understanding of freedom is a little bit overall, and this is a generalization, but a little bit funky, and not in a good way. A little bit distorted or something, in my view. And I have a long kind of background in being an appreciator of jazz culture, and so I want to kind of come from there a bit to talk about freedom and how I understand it. So one of the most, I think, influential crystallized pieces of writing about freedom that I was exposed to, I might even try to bring it up actually, was by Questlove of the Roots. It might be, I'm trying to figure out which Roots album it was in the liner notes. Liner notes, let's see. Let's see. Yeah, because the Roots, if you buy their CDs or the albums, not just downloading MP3s. Yep, that was the time. They'd have these extensive liner notes written by Questlove, who's the drummer, and kind of like maybe, I don't know if you can call him a band leader. It's hard to say. So, okay, so I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find it right away. Let me see. Okay, so I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find it. But basically, Questlove talks about jazz, and I think when Questlove says jazz, they mean hip hop too, right? Is the expression of the black body's freedom within this structure, rigid structure. So the beat, the rhythm, the constant rhythm, and the black body's freedom, expression of freedom. So it's this contrast between freedom and structure. And in this case, it's even talking about Europeanism. So freedom within Europeanism. And the way I understand that now musically is kind of like all modern black music is a combination of European and Africanist sensibilities kind of mending together, blending. So you have this usually this consistent 4/4 beat, 4/4 2/4 beat. It's like dunce kunz dunce kunz dunce kunz. That's, but underneath that there's this polyrhythmic feeling hidden underneath. So like the like the congas, djembes, like hand drums, a feeling of Africanist rhythm hidden underneath this 4/4 kind of rigid time, or it sounds like rigid time. And that's something that's been really formidable for me to understand. As this contrast of freedom and structure, I find really interesting. And as you dance in black musics, black cultures, I think you grow an appreciation that actually there's a transmutation of structure. The structure is used as something that's liberatory for the body, rhythmically, expression wise. The heart of this is probably a little bit hard to talk about without really being in a room with each other with music. So I'm just going to a little bit leave it at that. But what this also resonated inside of me as well is in Asian somatics culture, there's a relationship between freedom and discipline. One way this is understood is the concept of shizen or shizentai. Shizen means natural, or it in kind of like the characters, it breaks down to the self that manifests as itself, something like that. Tai is body, so natural body, the body manifesting as itself, as it is. Key point here, and Asian martial arts practices from also to any kind of somatic practices from Asia, there's this idea of connecting heaven to earth through the body. So that is through your taiji po, that runs through the crown of your head all the way through the root. It's a pole that runs. In this central channel, anchored in your dantian, in your lower dantian, that is your hara. So that's your pelvis, abdomen center, runs through there as the center of the body. This is how humans, sensing that is how humans manifest their natural manifestation of self. But it is through discipline you gain that. Strange, right? This is the paradox. You humans, to be natural, need to actually discipline and have structure. Now, what I find is that a lot of Westernist somatics applications kind of ignore this part, or kind of are in a different developmental stage. Because when you talk about the person who is manifesting themselves as naturally as they can, but through disciplining, this is a person who has been in a life process that has some rigor. And this sensibility, I think, people might realize this is connected through all the animist embodiment arts, whether it's Africanist, Asian, indigenous to Turtle Island, what have you. This sensibility of the paradox between discipline and freedom in the body. Discipline in the body and freedom in the body are connected together, right? And this is something actually that's woefully missing as a concept in Westernist somatics. There is, and I think we see this because I find, I'm just going to be plain honest that in Westernist somatics culture, there's a lot of exploration of impulse, but it's a little bit like there isn't a skill being built. There's a lot of sprawl of impulse, unfurling of impulse. And, yes, there is some shaping of skill, but it's like, like, what do you call skill? Okay. what I call skill, right, in the natural body is like, you might not be able to see this right now, but to be able to like move your spine like an animal. Boom, boom, like the undulating spine of a snake. You know, you probably can't see this, but you know that kind of the beautiful way animals move with their rippling spine, rippling body, watery, fluid, yin and yang coming together. That's actually technique for humans, because we kind of forget that. And so there's a technique to all this. And I don't think we discuss it enough as technique. We discuss it, a lot of it too much, as discovering your impulse and following it. And it's like, yes, but there needs to be toning, right? And it's fine, I think. I think one way to understand this is in developmental stages, right? So if you give maybe a toddler a marimba and some sticks to bang it with, they're just going to randomly follow their impulse. Like, bing, bing, boom, 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 bing, bing, bing. Like, what? Maybe not even that. So they have a disorganized impulse, which is fine. But is that adulthood? And that's what I'm going to say, is a lot of Western somatics are not necessarily trying to move the person towards adulthood. And so the paradigm keeps reverting back to being a child, which is beautiful. But I think there's a very anxious attachment towards being child in Westernist somatic culture. And that also pertains to this obsession with trauma safety, because you have to protect children, but that's not really what we're doing. And I think this is especially relevant when you're talking about whiteness, because you can't have white children ruling the world in these positions of power. You see, I think a lot of people confuse the problem with white supremacy isn't necessarily that there's white people ruling everything, although that is kind of a problem, but bear with me. When you actually take a look, the larger underlying problem is there this kind of developmental immaturity that is coddled and allowed to rule. And one of the expressions of that is whiteness. Right? So we're a culture ruled by developmental immaturity, embodied immaturity. So let's talk a little bit more about what we can do with that. And I'm going to say also that of course, the other side, right? Nothing is pure, nothing is simple. There is a side when too much discipline and becomes totalitarian. So I invite you to also understand the disciplining. How would I hold it? We want the discipline to move us into a direction that can hold that paradox and help us be sovereign beings, right? So let's be clear about what the discipline is for. Okay? So I just wanted to clear that up, because I know there's one thing that's really important in talking about Asian somatics culture, is that Asia is one of the few geo-regions of the world where embodiment practices and animism have survived entangled with imperialism. Right? Like, can you get that? Like, Asia is the only geo-region really that embodiment practices and animism have survived alongside imperialism. They're intertwined. Like, for example, traditional Chinese medicine, established by the Yellow Emperor. Do you think that's real? Hell no. No. Traditional Chinese medicine is, before that, is a deeply regional animist culture and it was synthesized in what we call TCM through an imperial process and codified. And so a lot of Asian arts are like that, including the martial arts. So that's something really important for people to know. So you're not going to get a truly liberatory practice by just taking in Asian somatics without any filters. You have to be able to understand the history of it, right? And this is kind of like why people need to listen to us Asian people, because we kind of understand these things. Or I don't know. I think it's useful. Obviously, a lot of the time, we're also reaching back into our culture for authenticity. But to develop critique, develop complex relationship, we got to think about all the things. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I botched that, but okay. So let's talk about technique. Okay. Okay. So the little piece of technique I've been working on, and I believe this is actually relevant to all animist embodied arts, is modulation. Now, what is modulation? So when we look at the history of Westernist somatics, we have two broad phases. The first phase, a lot of it we might call annihilation or catharsis. So a lot of this stuff, okay, so I'm simplifying Western somatics history, right? You all understand that, right? It's like I'm making it from 1960 on, and there's a whole history before that, and there's a variety of things that happen, but just bear with me. I'm making it simple on purpose. Annihilation. Annihilation is like stomping, yelling, all the stuff people did as like primal scream therapy. You see it in a lot of the screaming and yelling white people in kind of like cults in the 60s and 70s. It's like deep catharsis that is like blows over the top. Cool. And the amplitude, but it's a little bit like, you might imagine the spine is still fused together, and then there's this like rocking up and down, kind of like basically tantruming, to be honest. And then people figured out like, oh shit, this is re-traumatizing people, all this catharsis, right? Oh fuck. What we need to do is titrate. So by titration, we're meaning kind of taking little drops of stimulus and unfolding them before you expand on them. Little drops of stimulus. Titration. So annihilation to titration. And still, a lot of mainstream Westernist somatics evolves around these two binaries. You either annihilate or titrate. And that's the approach. So what's an issue here? This is something I've been talking a lot with my colleague, Dare Sohei. And on one of their latest podcasts, they talked about healing in polyrhythm. Important. It's very important. Healing in polyrhythm. And I'll probably expand on this more in the future, but when you think of polyrhythm, what's here is modulation. What is modulation in this case? It's playing with different elements of something in a temporal, ephemeral experience. Like when you listen to a jazz guitarist, like they were like bam, 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 bam. That's like round about midnight. They're modulating their speed, their amplitude, spacing, volume, playing with these things. This is neither titration or annihilation, but it can hold both these extremes, because you can be like, which is like an annihilation, and then bing, titration, dun dun boom, ding 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 ding, boom, right? That is modulating. You're playing. You have a bandwidth that you're playing with, and you can do that with your nervous system. And that's a lot of what Dare is currently talking about now too. They have their own way of speaking about it. I really invite you to go check out the Underworld podcast series. So that you can get that at bodyalter.org, and you can look under Underworld Party and see their series. And the one that's relevant is Time as Erotic Chi. So their style is a lot more complex than mine, a lot smarter, to be honest. But I think you'll get something out of it that's really valuable. So annihilation, titration, modulation. Modulation, if you've ever heard a jazz player play, is very skillful. Right? There is, and it's different from the child who's mashing the marimba, disorganized, which is fine. It organizes the disorganized impulse into artistry. Artistry of the nervous system. This is something fundamentally is kind of missing from the Westernist conceptions of healing. It's not based on that. Freedom in a lot of Westernist mind is built on the idea of liberation from having to master something. And there's a particular anxious, avoidant attachment dynamic in that. Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with so much of the domination of Westernist culture. There's this avoidance and push away, but into a space that actually, it's like a regression state, wanting to be in a developmental regression state. And I do believe there's a lot of value in people having to go through that. I mean, that is slightly debatable, but I mean, I think it's part of the process. I have a lot of critique around it. I have a lot of critique around, dance movement therapy and those disciplines around that subject. And it's not a critique of everything. I love all those things, but I think, I'm an in-group person in that, right? I'm not out-group. Skill is important, and there's this, no, I don't want to master my nervous system. I want to be all equal even, because obviously when you introduce mastery, you have unequalness. Mastery of impulse. Yeah, there's different skill levels. And it's very weird because there's this Westernist impulse to be like, oh, I want this freedom and equality. But I really want mentorship. I want eldership. I want to be able to securely attach to people who have a role in my community of being elder. Well, it's like, guess what the fuck? How the fuck do you think you're going to get that? You have to be really comfortable with skill differential. You have to be comfortable with the idea that you might never catch up to somebody you look up to. Like, I'm a street dancer. Been training for about 10 plus years. And, I started out late. That's part of it. But I know there's people who I teach and I look up to, I'll never catch up to. I just know that. It's kind of like that. We'll never catch up, some of us. And it's important for us to be not insecure in that and be like, even if we can't catch up in our artistry, we still have something to offer through a unique manifestation of self as a natural being. We really need to get more secure with that. We'll never catch up to the masters. I never will. There are people in my own trade I'm talking to you about that I'll never catch up to. And being secure with that is how you can actually have a one of my friends, anyways, I'm gonna shy away from that. But yeah, I don't know if they want me to use that language in public. There's some language they have for that organization, a social culture, but it has to do with weaving humanity, right? It's really beautiful. But to get that requires a comfortableness with skill differential, and maybe even never catching up to the elders or the top people in your community. It's just how it is. But that doesn't mean you don't practice your artistry of your nervous system, whatever you do. So let us be in a world where mastery and artistry of the nervous system is seen as virtue. Imagine that. Just imagine that. So this is an invitation to rethink all this stuff, right? Okay. So let's talk about the skills, the technique. The first thing I want to show is really simple modulation exercise. And if you're listening, this is not going to make any sense. Or, I mean, it will, but I'm going to try, but it might not. Okay. So all the animist embodied arts share one thing, is that relaxation is actually the skill. Relaxing, right? A lot of people, and this is the Westernist fragmented mind, it's about training muscles, individual muscles, and all this stuff. It's like, no. You use the whole body together. And the way you use the whole body together has to be really couched in relaxing. You use relaxation to control your body, not tensing. Tensing means our body's movement becomes connected to fear, things that make us tense, and fragments our body. We're using our bodies in parts. To use the whole body, the technique is in relaxing. Okay? So the one way to understand this, and the one way to feel this in your body, right, is to very simply, from your center, so it's from your center line, take a fist, relax, but relax like there's some energy in it. Okay, and you're gonna throw out that energy and release it. So you have energy in your hand. And when you're imagining energy in your hand, you're not using thought to say, I'm gonna grip tense. You're like, I'm imagining powerful energy. So you actually use intention instead of this mind mechanical, I'm gonna tense up. I don't know if this might take a while for it to really stick. The difference between intention and like this mechanical, I'm gonna do this thing and I'm gonna tense up and blah 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 blah. Intention of force in your fist, and like there's something in here that's very powerful. And what you're gonna do, you're gonna maybe even so you form a fist and you take it to your other shoulder. So you're letting your body gently twist a bit. You're taking it to the other shoulder, and what you're gonna do is you're gonna throw that fist out. And when your arms are fully extended, you release your fingers and relax your arms into a straight line. And then breathe out. Then you're gonna slowly connect chi into your hand again. And you're gonna bring that energy back in. So you're throwing the energy out, collecting it, and bring it back in. And this is all done through different ways of relaxing. And this is a little bit probably tricky. Okay, so what happens when you relax? When you're using muscle to tense up your body, and you're using your muscle not as a communication portal, but as a way to be tense, chi doesn't flow. Energy doesn't flow. When you relax, energy flows. So even as you're like imagining energy in your hand that's very strong, there's a certain part of it that's actually, it's not mechanical tension actually that you're using. You're using chi, okay? Energy. So create the fist. There's a lot of energy in it, and you're gonna throw it out. You're gonna like whip it, right? And you can whip it slow right now. Pam! And when it's straight, you're relaxing. You're relaxing your joints, you're relaxing your muscles, you're relaxing your fingers. But the centrifugal force, and then you relax and it snaps straight. And then from there, you're going to collect the energy back into your hand. And then reset. So, boom. So what it would feel like, what it should look like, is that it's like whips and then snaps very fast, and then snaps back pretty fast, and then it relaxes into recollection. The recollection is like gentle and lands, right? So it's like boom, ha, boom, ha. Does that make sense? So what is this? What am I doing? So the amplitude and speed is rising to the very peak and then landing gently. Boom, ha, fast, slow, right? So if you're listening to the audio, I hope you get a little feeling of that. Fast, slow. You might even use that breath. Fast, slow, fast, slow, fast, slow. And you don't even have to make a fist. That's just one way to visualize it. You can just have an open arm and okay, fast, slow, fast, slow, fast, slow, fast, slow, fast, slow, fast, slow. Okay? And this fast, slow movement you can do with your whole body. Fast, slow. So right, so you can come from a slightly hunched position to a straight up position fast, and then slowly relax. So like, okay, so not hunched so much, but relaxed, to like straightened. But so when you're straightening, you're not rigidly straightening. This, at your most straight, you're actually relaxing your spine, relaxing all your muscles. So you're using your body like a whip, right? This is the difference between the supple taiji pole of energetic martial arts, because it's straight up and down. There's a taiji pole straight as fuck, but something that's very rigid in white culture, like kind of pickle up your butt, like butt that is afraid. That's the difference. It's actually, the straightness is created through relaxation of the musculature and the joints and stuff. And then when you have that relaxation, gravity is able to enter into your body and express itself. Gravity is love, unconditional love. You're able to move from a grounded place, even in high amplitude. Right? What they call fajin, part of the mechanics of fajin, F-A-J-I-N, is one of the expressions of it is like Bruce Lee's one-punch punch. Essentially the secret of that, one of the secrets as I understand, is the use of manipulation of gravity. And you get that through relaxation and chi, right? So in this modulation pattern exists in all, like in street dance, for example, in locking, there's a street dance called locking. There's these things called points, and it's like the spinal wave to like this sharp pointing, Uncle Sam points they call it, and then pam, and it's not, you're not using your muscles to tense because that would shorten everything up, or it's more like you're using chi. So relaxation has to be foundational. Pam, right? And karate, when you punch, the kime, so where you stop, that's not necessarily a mechanical tighten. Bam! It's actually created through this explosive relaxation. Boom, tighten. So at the extension of your punch, your punch comes out like a whip, right? If you exaggerate, and when the punch comes out as a whip, you're twisting back, but relaxing, and then bam you connect through the earth, through your hara, which is the center, all the way through your arm, and it creates impact. Bam! That's manipulation of chi. So even in popping, I do popping, which looks like contraction, but it's really actually explosion of chi. So popping is an art where there's like muscle twitches that look robotic, and there's sharp stops. What's happening there is actually this bam, but really contained, this fast slow. So it's like tense, relax, but the tension is actually just explosion of chi. It's not mechanical tension. It's intention that is exploding, right? Difference. Intention versus tension is different. Intention requires a level of relaxation underneath. So this is the difference. To train that is mastery of impulse. And we'll get even more into that right now. But this training, right? Because when you let's say, take your fist out and whip it out like that, this creates a sense of discipline in your body. That straight line, the image has been created. So you have different images in your body, center line, arms straight, like different places where you can place your body that has a sense of organization. And humans actually require organization of the body to be truly liberated, because once you have that technique, you're able to move and use your full human potential. Oh, funny word, human potential is interesting, because it's actually kind of animal potential, because that is actually what like a lot of animals do when they're moving in that. That's why you see the spine rippling. It's not all mechanical. Part of it is, but I mean, there's different layers of reality. A lot of this stuff you won't understand, I think, and I don't understand it all, but until you actually do the thing. But explosive relaxing as doing, conditioning yourself, and then it becomes being. And this is different from titration or annihilation, because annihilation is just, I don't know, is like somebody still moving in the tantrum. They're moving in the tantrum. They're moving with mechanical tension. They're trying to get this thing out. So often when you see people in a tantrum, they can't catch the rhythm. They can't play in it. You need something else for that. And titration is like this relaxation that has no energy in it. It's like still fragmented. It's kind of like there's no paradox. There's no discipline. There's no explosiveness in the relaxation. There's no power. It's a kind of bit frozen, I would say, even just a bit. That's like it's structureless. So but what you can do actually, see, it's funny, right? Is you actually kind of take both of those elements, annihilation, titration, and kind of blend them into each other. Then you get modulation. So you get the yin and the yang, and you put it together. Boom. Then you get something else. Yeah. So that is an important thing. Yeah, and it was actually interesting. I was the yin and the yang thing. I was talking to a friend of mine, Portia, and they had a teacher apparently in TCM that, Portia was on the first podcast, but they said everything can be understood through yin and yang. I'm like, oh yeah, interesting. So we talked a little bit about that, but I hope that's a little bit, I agree. So there's the yang of annihilation and the yin of titration. It's like, boom, you put them together. Now you get play. You have paradox. You have polyrhythm. You have modulation. Okay. So next thing moving on. How do we use then this modulation to master impulse? Okay. To do this, I'm going to talk about I'm going to use a taxonomy from street dance, and it's not a one-for-one copy. It will mean slightly something different, but it's familiar. It'll make sense. Moves, grooves, and styles. For our sake, right? And this is how kind of street dance is structured: moves, grooves, and styles. So, let's it's a little bit of simplification, right? Like this is not a one-to-one copy of the idea, but it's lifted off, and you'll see. So moves are like the raw impulse, right? So let's say so you're at a nightclub and we're all dancing together, and the music, there's like you're feeling the music, and there's this just weird one impulse that you rotate maybe your right shoulder really big to the beat. It's like boom, and then your shoulder rotates, and it's just kind of like an impulse, right? That's a move. That's the raw impulse that our body is responding to the stimulus. Okay, right? The right shoulder moves really big, and you're leaning to the left or something. And you probably, if you're on audio, you probably can't fully see this, but you're kind of leaning back, and then one shoulder is rotating backwards, right? Up and back. That's a single time. That's a move. Okay. And then groove, you repeat that, and you feel out the movement fully. So you're like, oh. So maybe I do it twice, like, oh, shoulder roll, right? That becomes a groove. Repetition and intentional repetition. And you'll notice when you're at a club of people who know this stuff, mostly black and brown folks, is that when you see you have an impulse, and then you start shaping that into a groove, other people catch on and they start doing with you. They're like, uh-huh, right? So now you're starting to expand this groove and you feel it out fully, and other people are catching on. Styles, in this sense, is now when you start to play with this, you're starting to modulate the shoulder roll. So maybe you do it in double time, right? Shoulder roll. Or maybe you do it in expanded time, like shoulder roll, right? And then maybe you reverse. So what you have then, or you can even cut it up, like 1, 2, 3, 4. So instead of doing the shoulder roll all at once, you do it in ta 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 ta. You break it up, and now you have a style. And then maybe you do it with both shoulders, right? You're like ba 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 ba. And you're using the rhythm. You're cutting up the rhythm using your movement now, right? Polyrhythm. Boom, ba ba ba. That's all shoulder roll. Move. Start off as a move, just one single roll. And people are like, oh yeah, you feel it. And then you start turning into groove. Everybody's like, yeah, style, when you start to play with it, modulate it around, and make it really musical, rhythmic, polyrhythmic, then the circle starts to open, and they're like, express yourself. And then you're getting down, showing that thing, like showing your variations of that thing, your mastery of impulse in the circle. This form is foundation to a lot of Africanist vernacular dances, and it's the raw essence of it if you take it. So, for example, there's a dance called Scarecrow, which a lot of Africanist vernacular dances have, themes from the South, because that's where a lot of the dances were birthed, on plantations. And so particularly the Scarecrow is, the analytical way to think about it is about the uncanniness of the black body, also the use of the black body as a prop, as like kind of slave labor. That's part of the Scarecrow's analytical understanding. But when the Scarecrow emerged, it was probably literally in like a circle. Somebody was like had an impulse to do one arm of a scarecrow, maybe even. So they're lifting their arm and their wrists are dangling like a scarecrow, and they're like, whoom, and they hit a scarecrow position. The very first scarecrow that might have emerged, and that was just a move probably. And there's an analytical side we can talk about, but the person who's dancing probably isn't like, this is actually a critique. They're not thinking necessarily that. It just emerges from the collective dream field that they're moving within, right? Scarecrow arm, one arm, boom, like one arm rising to hit the position, dangling, straight arm dangling a wrist, scarecrow. And then maybe it turns into a groove because somebody's like, oh, cool. So the person's like, whoom, the other arm goes up. Now they're swinging their arms like a scarecrow, but to the music. Whoom, 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 whoom. And then their neck moves like that. This is actually the dance. I don't know if you can see it. I'm not very good at this dance, but yeah, right? And then that develops. And so that's the groove that's being experimented. Scarecrow, right? And then the style is modulating with that. So it might be like, and yeah, and there's also other theories that the Scarecrow came in from Alice in Wonderland too. So I'm not claiming that that's the only thing, but just saying, that's one way to look at it. Moves, grooves, and style. So like, or even you have, I can't really do it, but the funky chicken, which is kind of like where you you connect your kind of wrists to the side of your ribs and you're flapping, and that might start off as like a move, just one person going like in a circle, but then they repeat it and they're like, oh, I'm feeling out this impulse now, right? Funky chicken, and that becomes a style where you're playing with it. So all the dance styles are kind of built up like this, from small pieces of impulse to grooves that feel out the impulse, and then into a style that plays with the impulse that's mastered. Moves, grooves, and styles. And we can use this taxonomy for moving through and understanding all kinds of things that we do. So let me give you an example. Let's say that imagine something triggered you, okay? And the response you have in your body is like kind of like so your arms come up. If you're just on the audio, you just have to imagine it's kind of like when somebody sees a snake or something, like, and they're like scared by it, and they're like, ah, and their arms go up, their hands go up and their elbows are bent and like, ah, and their body recoils, right? Treat that as a move. The body naturally responding to stimulus in its environment without much control or thought. Okay? How can we move through this? Using moves, grooves, and styles. Like, intentionally repeat. Oh. So instead of just being like, and then walking away, like letting that event just be like that, or even exploring in a therapy session, like, oh, this is how I felt. Okay, I'm feeling less frozen. Like, let's move a little bit beyond that. Let's move a little bit beyond, like, oh, I was frozen, I'm not now. Okay. It's like, no. Maybe let's try to do something from there. Oh. oh, and this is actually very basic dance movement therapy stuff, actually. So this is the interesting thing, right? So you groove. So you have the initial surprise, and then you groove. And then maybe that changes the texture into, oh, oh. And if you have the audio, my arms are getting a little bit bigger. My body is starting to expand. My spine is starting to undulate with that. Oh, oh, oh. And this is kind of like where this technique of modulation through relaxation takes over. Because you're like unfreezing and also styling and feeling out at the same time. You're like, oh, oh. And then play with, oh, 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 oh. And if you're on the audio, you can't see, but I'm playing with different ways of like being surprised or being almost repulsed or avoiding something. Like, oh, 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 oh. And so you can play with your breath rhythmically. Obviously, that's a part of it because you need that to relax. So you're combining the modulation technique to develop the style. And this creates technique in your body, creates nervous system artistry. And this is something that's different from yeah. You're not just exploring, you're actually cultivating. Oh, huh. And so when you've unfrozen this thing that's been in your body, this maybe scared reaction, you're not just unthawing it and it being sprawling, you're actually reorganizing that movement pattern. And, not that any of this is new, actually. Not that any of this is not already part of dance movement therapy and other disciplines and somatics in general. It's just that I think there's just like a dominant paradigm where it's seen that like this organization rhythmically isn't important or something. It's like, no, we're not actually trying to recreate babies. If we're adults in a therapeutic environment, like we might child regress for a moment to reach a certain developmental stage, but I think it's a little bit problematic when we're or it does create problems if our focus is to keep going back to being a regressed child in our soma. We're toning our body to become developmental children. And I think this is a white westernist thing. There's a fear of initiation, there's a fear of having your skill assessed, there's a fear of developing artistry, and at the same time there's a real longing for artistry, there's a real longing for people who have eldership. And to get there, we need to get really unfragile about things like skill differential, because you might never catch up. I'll never catch up to a lot of the people who I train with, I dance with. I've never gone through the prelim of a battle, for example. It's just not available to me. I don't think I ever will. My artistry, where I can excel in, is more in this place where bringing, like this is the place. In the street dance scene, I'm nothing in terms of my technique, in terms of my execution, in terms of my ability to, for polyrhythm, all those things, right? I'm a real baby. But I can bring those ideas into this space and work with them, develop them, and something as a kind of a note to all this on talking about this, I want to kind of maybe quote unquote end with is that I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about anti-Blackness in our culture. I think it confuses people because I'm not necessarily a huge proponent of intersectional politics in the most mainstream way. I know that intersectionality and these other things are also things that have changed their meaning with time as they disseminated. It's like all parts of Black culture, frankly, is like when things get exported to the mainstream and their meaning changes. It's been happening over and over again, right? And so I think there's a lot of conversations we probably need to have about all this stuff, but and I also have critiques of intersectionality as in its or understanding of it, and just being really realistic that it was developed in a law context. So it's developed in a context of people surviving in white dominant institutions, and explaining people to institutions and institutions to people. I don't think intersectionality on its own, even at its nascence, necessarily um uh like completely finally useful without the rest of the cultural context when person to person interactions. I think it's very important. And I'll probably go on a later podcast to talk about this a lot longer. It's a complicated topic, but my interest in anti-racism and also so like anti-blackness and looking at that comes from my dance background. That was actually, I was politicized through dance before I learned anything about critical race theory. So I think that's a really important thing, because I think a lot of people, I feel like, confuse me, like, where are you coming from? Or like, why are you so critical? It's like, well, actually, my understanding of emergence, the politics of the body, really comes from being immersed, doing anthropological research, but also being immersed in Africanist vernacular dance for like, yeah, in the culture itself, about 20 years, and then in practicing seriously about 12 years. So because before I was kind of like a DJ, I was a club goer, I was like a, artist who's looking at these things. And so I've traveled a lot of spaces that are multiracial, black and brown environments, essentially studying and trying to understand the embodied ritual and how it works and how emergence works through the body, and the spinal undulation that brings up the ancestors through the core, like watching that happen, trying to understand it, like listening, researching the history of like civil rights and the dance movements that were connected, and using my own um, kind of understanding of my own body to kind of piece together, like, oh, what's actually happening underneath these political movements and their connection to the body. And that's really what it's been through. So I think a lot of people get confused, but I don't have a lot of like, for me, the critical race theory stuff around privilege and all stuff, like, I think is useful as a tool. It's like one thing, one move that you can use out of many. That's how I understand it. It's not like the entire thing. And also, like, if you're just using it as a move and it's just your impulse and there's not a mastery of the impulse to understand things like intersectionality, privilege, it doesn't live as a polyrhythmic living thing in your body, I don't think you're getting it, to be honest. I don't think you're understanding it. You're not fully um yeah. And I can, oh yeah, this gets into a whole thing. It's like, how can you understand intersectionality without understanding polyrhythms through the body? You probably can't. In the way that intersectionality is a reflection of this animist quantum multi-layered reality and seeing from different perspectives, you're not like, there's a part of intersectionality you're not going to understand if you don't have a polyrhythmical understanding of it. It's context, right? It's like right, if you understand it as like an Africanist or even pan-animist idea, you need to have it in your body to get it. And I think a lot of people are taking, it's like a lot of arts that are animist and, particularly Africanist, people take it out of context, export it, turn it into pop, and divorce it from the context, the somatic context. And my thing is a lot more like, let's understand the somatic context, because I think when we understand the somatic context for all this stuff, we can actually achieve a lot more. What is beyond called a solidarity that's not rigid. It's like a solidarity that's embodied. It's about moving in the groove. together, being on the one, but also being able to have freedom, have your own place, you move around. There's just a lot of body intelligence and collective behavior that's really missing in our conception of politics, and that's a lot of the reason why I frankly probably disliked by a lot of people, because I'm very adamant about that. And yeah, I think, and I call it, because I think even in our industry, or my former industry, or whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of, you know, it's white folks who don't get it, and it's even black folks, and all kinds of other folks, kind of exploiting and not really communicating the cultural context for all this to really be alive, with each other. It's not being taught. And at a certain point, I was just kind of fed up with that reality. And, that's why I talked about, yeah, the cult of black feminism. There's this proximity politics that plays out, in this kind of white, black hyper binary around anti-racism work, and how, yeah, there's this kind of real social currency around blackness that gets thrown around, by a very select few number of people, actually, that get to make money from that. And they're people of all races, frankly, including black, including white, including indigenous, including Asian, right? And I find the irony of that. I find the deep irony of that is like, oh, you're talking about all this stuff. Maybe it's, but the somatic context is not being communicated. How to be in ritual with each other through the body is not being communicated. That's the foundation. If your body does not have an understanding of polyrhythm, of modulation in the body, it's like those things need to combine with your understandings of things like privilege, intersectionality. You need to be able to play with those things rhythmically, understand them from different perspectives, and also realize when, oh, that's not the style that I'm doing right now. Oh, like this moment calls for a different style or a different expression of the style. It does, like, we're missing that deeply. And so that's a big part of why I'm moving the way I am now. And yeah, I think I'll have definitely a longer podcast about how I relate to black culture, anti-blackness, and those subjects, because I think it's a little bit more nuanced. It's not. I just don't come from that background of, like, I definitely learned a lot from 2015 to 2020 through the internet, and reading about critical race theory, although I don't read a lot, but it's like there's a whole lay emergent culture of embodied quote unquote anti-racist, quote unquote liberatory work that frankly gets ignored. And it makes me really sad. Like, it makes me even angry, because that's my people. Those are my elders. Like, yeah. I'll record another podcast, but it means a lot to me, and I've had the grace of being, claimed or initiated into a community in a kind of emergent way. It's not all love or anything. I have people I argue with in the street dance world too, who I feel like are just, like, their cure to everything has become this kind of like, like CRT, rigid CRT politics. I'm just like, no, dude. There's a few people who are really good dancers, but also I think their shit around this game is like, yeah, kind of like gave into whiteness in a way they don't understand. So there's a lot going on for me in that too. But yeah, and I might call that out, to be honest, in the future in a podcast. But But anyways, all this stuff is deeply, really important to me. And I really believe that when we really understand animism, polyrhythm, and particularly the way Africanist expressions really have been holding that for us as a collective. Like Africanism has really held the idea of polyrhythm together more than any other cultural geo-region has held that for the collective. You know, different people have different parts of the hologram of animism, but the Africanism holds this. Polyrhythm is part of every animist tradition, but in the modern context, it's really Africanist tradition. Black folks have been preserving this lineage, so there's a lot of respect and gratitude. I think we all need to have as as all of our common ancestors, and I really believe when we actually get that, understand that, our and combine that with the lucidity of actual race politics in the world, not bypassing. We're not like going into this like we're not turning into the white hippie guy who's spiritually bypassing while playing a djembe. It's like you're combining that lucidity, sharpness, bam, right, boom, right. You're combining that sharpness and lucidity of seeing the world for what it is, with that also that other layer of underlayer of the dream world, the polyrhythm that exists there, the ancestors, the commonality, the liquidity of the ancestors. Like we share our ancestors actually. Is this something we don't really talk about? We don't have just our blood lineage ancestors. We actually share them. We share our ancestors. It's a fucking party in the underworld. Not to riff on Dare, but yeah, it's an underworld party. We share our ancestors if we start to pay attention, but we combine that with sharpness. So that's again, kind of like what I talked to with Portia about. It's like yin and yang, right? Yin, the sharing of the ancestors, the liquid polyrhythmic, cross-cultural expression of humanness, and sharpness, yang, the lucidity around the differences of our experience based on our racial, cultural, and other positions like gender, class, right? Combining that, yin and yang. Until you combine that, you just have annihilation and titration. You just have like fragmentation. You have like splotchy, relaxed, kind of like frozenness. Just frozenness. And you have tantrums. It's like, no. We're not developmental adults in the fullest cultural sense until we're able to combine multiple layers, yin and yang, multiple layers, the quantum layer of the ancestors, playing with each other, sharing rhythms across time, sharing movements across time. Yang, consensus reality layer. Look at the world around us. Look at its reality. Look at the structural issues. Play back and forth, right? Being able to play on both sides. You can dive into that underlying silence of the rhythm, like boom, 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 like the feeling that the drums and other instruments create. And you also express the bam, 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 all the stuff you hear on the surface. You modulate through them, using relaxation. Relaxation as chi manipulation. Not tension, but intention to shape your impulse. This is what we're talking about. Hooah. All right, peace.